from
So
my
good
research.
afternoon, everybody, or good morning, wherever you are. And here's the five beautiful ones from TESOL, welcoming you to our 2024 podcast. And today, to be fast, we begin now. And what we want to do today is to discuss with you how your experiences on how to read professional literature. So, someone like me, for example, I've been at it for so long, I don't even realize it's a problem, but it is a problem. It is a problem. Even students that passed with me masters, especially coursework masters, they go to work, they come back to do research with me, and the first question they ask, we don't know how to read professional literature. So today we have our home team. We've got Lala from Indonesia, we've got Quang from Vietnam, and we have Andrew Ryan from everywhere. So Professor Andrew Ryan, currently in Thailand, but also Professor Emeritus from Canberra. We have Mengli, who is Australia Awards scholarship recipient, and we're very pleased that he actually had enough courage to come here and actually share with us his own findings on research that he has conducted actually at my university under my mentoring or supervision. So maybe I will just start with general questions. And please do not take longer than a minute to answer so that we don't chew with one question chew up the entire podcast. So, not mainly, maybe I'll ask Lala, what, what issue would you say students or even your colleagues or even experienced researchers you have noticed with regard to professional literature, why do you think it's what issue do you think they have that they need to address? Or in other words, why do you think we need to talk about how to read professional literature?
Right. Thank you, Anya. I personally believe that professional reading provides English teachers and educators with access to the latest research, teaching methodologies, and best practices in language acquisition, literacy development, and literature instruction. However, professional reading skills are actually missing from our current curriculum. It's even missing in the module of autonomous learning for teachers who are doing the certification program mandated by the government. So I think when the curriculum development doesn't run well here in our department, when the development of assessment framework doesn't run well here, I believe that it's because we don't or never systematize our reading of literature, right? I know that some people are so much into bibliometric analysis. They are using some technological softwares to help them find the gap in the literature, but I don't think it's sufficient. We still need people like you and Andrew who can help us infer the research findings and translate that into, let's say, a new insight. So I learned how to use some basic steps in the bibliometric study, but I'm not happy with it, Anya. So I think what I'm doing right now is trying to systematize the professional reading skills development for my colleagues and also for my students because we don't have much time, right? 3 years, 4 years in the department, they have to set themselves as a practitioner of 21st century English language teaching. So yes, we have to do that. That's why this topic is very relevant for us this
Okay,
time.
so let me summarize. Basically, what you're saying is the problem is with interpretation.
Right.
Okay, so Quang, you have 1 minute to help us begin the podcast so that we have to fit in everybody and everything. So why do you think, Quang, it's important to discuss professional reading skills? And have you noticed anyone, like your students, maybe you think your colleagues can read professional literature, or maybe you think people in Australia or in America are not very good at it? What do you think?
Basically, everyone with literacy skills can read, actually. But the problem is that, well, while they read, they do not understand. I mean, many of the students just keep on like reading and reading and reading, and they keep telling me that I need to read like 20 or 30 papers this week. But then when I ask them, like, what do you get from the papers? What can you understand from it? What are the drawback and the strength of the research?
So what's
And
the
well,
problem? What's the problem? Why is it, Quang? Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just sort of trying to get to the target. So why? Why can students return 20 papers? None of my students read 20. I wish they did. Um, so if they read this much, where's the problem?
well, they
Why
do not
can't they
understand.
understand? What does that mean?
It means that there's some problem with the reading comprehension skills. This is not just about reading out loud. It's not just about reading words. It's about getting the essence or the is essential part of the the academic report or the academic essays, and they just cannot understand,
Okay,
or they may
so
misunderstand the points. They're
so
lacking the skills to really comprehend the text
right.
and to
So
link
thank
them to their prior knowledge.
right. So thank you so much. So one of the things that I have noticed that in education, at least, I bet that in every discipline this happens. We have magical words, and this is one of the points that we'll make straight away from the beginning of this podcast. At least, let's speak about education. Education has magical words, and one of those magical words is reading comprehension. Right? So with that word, we seem to be communicating some information, but in fact, we're communicating nothing because it's a magical word. Like it says everything, therefore it says nothing. So one of the things that I would like us today to complete or accomplish at the end of this podcast is to actually have more meat underneath this word. Now I know what I mean by that, but if I just kept telling you what I mean, then I'll hijack the podcast, and I might as well just give you a 10-minute lecture and nobody will understand a thing. So I think that reading comprehension is a magical word, and I think that if we are to now unravel the concept of what it means, we need to think what kind of meat to put underneath it. And Andrew Lyon, myself, and I think in the professional literature it's called framework. How do you conceptualize reading comprehension so that you know what you are talking about? And when your framework fails, then you can go back to it and say, I defined it badly. How can I change it? And which evidence do I need to include now so that I can think about it differently or better? So, Andrew, are you still here with us, or did I get you disappear? Andrew has disappeared. He always has problems with his connection. So we've had mainly now to you. So Lala spoke, Quang spoke. Mengli, you haven't spoken yet, right? So Mengli,
Yes.
do you think that talking or exploring the concept of reading professional literature is important, and why?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important because I normally we always talk about it, but to me it remains a broad concept. And to be honest, sometimes we don't know what we are doing with it. We do not have like clear picture of how it should be fall, and we just don't want to forever remain lost with this concept. So it's time we need theories or framework, just like you said, that we need to navigate through the skill. And from my background, I would say I'm pretty new to research at least the practical aspect of research. And I would say like for the most time I read, like the problem that we really encounter is that we have no purpose in reading. And that is why like for me it remains forever. Like it remain a lost concept forever, I think.
Okay, so I didn't understand, but I don't want to clarify it because I don't want to give away the game because I know your work. So I'm just gonna leave it. Anyone who can concisely summarize what you said, do it for yourself. I'm just not gonna go there because I don't want to give away what you are actually what your findings from research are, which we will discuss shortly. Andrew, would you like to comment a little bit on the concept of why is do you think that people need some more precise understanding about how to read professional literature? Do you think everybody? Do you think that people in our profession know how to read professional literature?
No. Um, when I say no, I don't mean this in a bad way. I think that first of all, let me try to contextualize this whole thing. We currently live in a climate where there is a kind of headlong rush to to publish at any cost in the millions of journals that have appeared in the last decade or so. Everybody has a journal. Everybody is peer reviewed and so on, and everybody's trying to publish because universities are pressuring everybody to publish. So a lot of the research that is published is actually not very interesting. Even research published in so-called high-quality journals, which are those journals which are indexed in citation indices like Scopus and so on. And so we have a situation where we are drowning in papers. That's the first thing. The second thing is, at least from observing my students and to some extent colleagues and other people all over the world, people don't read. Partly because they don't know what they need to read, and partly because even when you read, you need to be able to ask critically important questions about the readings that you make. So it's not a question of, oh, everybody reads 20 journals, because nobody reads 20 journals, Wang. If I ask my students to read 20 journals, they would have a nervous breakdown. If I ask them what they read, they are incapable of telling me. If I ask them what their reading program is, they don't have one. And this is not new. I'm not criticizing my current lot of students. For the last 10 years or more, 20 years, 30 years, unless I tell people what to read, they don't read it. There are exceptions. Wang's one of them. Lala is another one. And I don't know Meng very well at all, actually. So unless I tell people to do things, they just don't do it, because there's no understanding of the requirement to read. And there is a good reason for that. And that is that a lot of the papers which are published are actually not particularly valuable, but maybe we can talk about that a bit later.
Okay, so hold that thought about value of publications, just in case. So how to tell, right? Just in case I forget that, I've just noted it down. Okay, so not to keep everybody waiting too long, I will ask Mengli to summarize. So just to take the tension away from Mengli, although he's his own man, he can do it. But basically, in his thesis, which he has finished just about in the Christmas break, I want to have more students like Mengli. They finish thesis before semester begins. So it's lovely. So, but Mengli, you have compared 3 methods. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have done and a little bit about your findings? You've got 10
So
minutes.
basically, over the past month, I have been examining 3 methods. The first one is this like this Charles Darwin University question resource on the how to make students read critically. So
So
they
Charles Darwin University, which is my university, has academic learning unit or academic support unit, where people are paid to help students with assignments and with English for assignments. So they help in various ways, and one of the ways they have is online resources. It
yes,
is assumed that those online resources, like everybody here would assume, are to help you so that you can tackle your issues in an independent way, right? Not always hanging on to the lecturer, please help, help, but you can actually get some answers to your questions through those online resources. So you had Charles Darwin University, so it was one method. You chose to analyze the resources from the perspective how they help you with your thesis. The second one
was the Chat GPT feature, and I decided to
okay. So
go for the Chat
you ask
GPT.
just wait. So you
Yes,
ask ChatGPT to help you with what?
with understanding the text, like the methodology, the findings, as well as the interpretation of the finding. So yeah,
And the
it,
third
it, it
method?
ran parallel to the question Anya mentioned earlier. That is the second tool I used. Yep. And the third one, it was the five question module from Anya herself. Like I think I have tested these three methods, like particularly around the topic of academic literacy. I want to know by applying these three tools, how can like it help me better understand the article itself and
So
and
if I can help you a little bit break down this major thesis that you are writing, so could we just briefly summarize how were or were not, okay? How were or were not the resources which are online and produced by Charles Darwin University Academic Learning Support Unit, how were those resources helpful or what were the problems that you identified? So maybe start with whether they were helpful and discuss.
I- from my finding, I would say they are partially helpful, but that is within that article only, and somehow it does not really like challenge reframing the way you think about the issue. And
So
it
in
is
what,
to
just wait, because um, you see, one way of talking about your reading, it is what did you expect and what did you get. So it seems to me you didn't you didn't have any expectations. You simply used their method and you looked at what popped out after you've used it, right?
yes.
So when you were using CDU's method, is it where is it when was it then that you noticed problems with it, or only after you used ChatGPT or my method when you started seeing problems with CDU's approach?
Or
When did you start seeing problems?
I think when I like compare the results of the three tools, it's
Okay, so
after, it's
only
not
then.
before. Yes,
So that's extremely important, right? Because all over Australia, we have academic learning support units. We have resources online to help people who are, writing their thesis or writing assignments. And what you're saying, when you work with that tool, and Charles Darwin University tools will not be any different than University of Canberra or University of Sydney. These people provide uniformly similar support. So what you're saying is when you were working with Charles Darwin University, it seemed okay, but you didn't see problems until you started using other methods. That's a very
yes.
interesting point to remember, because I would like you to, when you discuss in your discussion, to actually comment what are the implications of this statement. So you work with someone's method, you go, oh yeah, it's really good. Like every student loves their supervisor until they see other people. Right? You go to the big world and people are beating your bum, and you say, "Oh my God, I thought the world was very small." Right? So when you look, so, you have this bias, and when you go outside the framework, outside its bias, you start seeing that there were things you couldn't do. Okay, how did you do with so? How did you do with ChatGPT?
So I would say like with ChatGPT, like the responsibility of finding out what you want it rests solely on you, like how what depend on the effective prompt you can put in it, and depend on the fact that you have some prior knowledge about the topic so that you can like link it together, you can produce effective prompt to help you learn. But what I stress, what I consider the most important thing is like you need to have like schemata about the topic itself so that it's help you with understanding that. And the same thing I feel is absent with the CDU question list.
All
Yeah,
right. So what you're saying is, so we will come back to CDU, but at this very moment with ChatGPT, that was a good, interesting comment you made. Obviously, this needs maybe a little bit more testing, and not just by you, but I have other people. But what you're saying is, what you got out of ChatGPT was not
depend
inherent
on, yes, it's depend
but
on like
on
the
you,
effectiveness of the prompt. Yes,
on you, basically. So if
yes.
you know something, it will tell you. But if you don't know what to ask, you didn't feel you got more than you actually asked. All right. So what about an alliance method?
Uh, I feel like the essence of the method itself is not about grounding you into one concept or one finding, but is to like link you toward other concept or other relevant thing, and feel like it's push you to think about other thing from other perspective. Like what I
So
feel here is about like the intellectual expansion of that topic itself.
okay, so let me just sort of, because I haven't read those findings, because this month I'm whoever asked me for anything this month, everybody got the same email. Leave me alone until March, right? So I've been very busy, so I haven't read your findings. But what you're saying now is that with other methods, you were working with the author, but with Anya Lyon's method or my method was just 5 or 6 questions. That's all. I didn't have a method. I didn't have any PowerPoints or whatever. I just said, answer this, answer this, answer this, answer this. That's it, right? So I produced those questions within, 1 minute email. Mind you, I thought about them for a very long time, right? But 1 minute email today. So you felt there was an expansion that was lacking. So my questions were taking you outside the bias of the author. Okay. So we might get there later on how I did that. So there were differences between three methods, and the main difference between them was that two methods were keeping you within the bias of the author or bias of your own questions, right? So that's a little. So that's not academic. That's what you do at school, until you are 13, 14, and then later on, good teachers push you. Okay, so Lala, what would you say is the first, when you read an abstract or when you read a paper, and you have mentioned that people have difficulties interpreting or connecting with,
Mm.
this is, I think what you were saying was when you or your students, I don't know about you, but your students and maybe other people, you identified interpretation as a problem, mainly now defined interpretation as connecting with different frameworks.
Right.
So we no longer have reading comprehension here, but say one goal or a process required for reading comprehension is connecting with other frameworks, connecting
Mm.
with
Yeah.
concepts,
Right.
and maybe different frameworks on the same concept.
Mm.
Right? You cannot
Right.
understand blue until you saw green. You can't understand blue and green until you saw some, you have to compare and contrast.
Right.
So you mentioned interpretation. Um, I have my own method when I read papers, and recently I've noticed it's been really my enemy because I started reading too fast, and sometimes when people send me emails, I just
Yeah,
look for the things I look, and then I miss the detail. But
right.
when you read the paper, Lala, um, when you yourself read, or from your experiences, how your students or how your colleagues or how professors read and represent the ideas. Um, why do you think they have a problem with interpretation? Interpretation of what?
Right. I think since I completed my PhD, I became fully aware that reading is not merely connecting the dots, but it's actually a matter of problem solving, let's say, affairs. Because reading for emotion basically resonates with the principle of story science, coined by Professor Angus Fletcher, I believe. Every single text is a problem solving strategy. That's how I see it. Since
Who said
I
that? Who
came
said that? Did I say
uh,
that? Or did
Professor Angus Fletcher from Iowa, I guess he is the expert of neuroscience and also AI. And I think reading
but
for
just wait, because
emotion,
I said that too. So who was
right?
first?
I think yeah, I met you first, and then later in life I met this guy somewhere in the internet. So I think it's very interesting when we read a text, uh, fiction or non-fiction, our brain will process it as a story, and story is basically a problem-solving strategy. So I guess this mindset should be developed from from the first semester. I mean, it should be developed as early as possible, because if we read a text without a problem, then it will not reveal anything. So, from my long training at CDU with you and Andrew, I'm more aware that it is the problem that I have to identify first, and then how I always ask myself, how does the author formulate the problem in the very first place? So that's how I see the text, Anya. So I started with identifying the problem or disturbance in your method, and it will help me. It flow reading the text.
Right. So, not mainly Quang. Would you like to comment on this issue somehow? I'm leaving the question a little bit open to your
Yeah.
interpretation.
Yes. But before I comment on anything, I would like to ask first. I heard Bentley said that in his first study, he want to investigate how students should read, how to make students read critically, right? So what does critically mean? What does critical mean? First of all, and the second idea that I would like the second comments that I would like to make is on Lala's statement. He believed that we are talking about reading the text, right? Academic text, but are we really reading the text, or are we reading the discourse?
I
I
think
mean,
he answered that. I think he answered. He said, "We're reading a story," and
no,
then
no, yeah, yeah. It's not about the story, but well, the ideology that influence our understanding, the discourse which we are, which we are a part of. This is not just the story. This is not just the way that we make sense or understand the meaning. It's not just the meaning making process. It is how we are expected to understand that from the mainstream discourse of the field.
oh yeah, so obviously, but the story does the same, which is like if I read arguably, which is probably not true, but arguably, if I went and read some Vietnamese story, I don't have frameworks to interpret, so it'd be meaningless. I think in regard to Mengli, if I can just shorten the discussion just to get to where I wanted to be, I think with regard to Mengli, what he looked at is how different instruments help him to think critically. And I
What do you
think,
mean by critically?
well, he doesn't know. So he looked at how Charles Darwin University supports the process, and how ChatGPT can support a naive person's process, and how my model and what he's with the Charles Darwin University, he said critical within the approach he used. Critical meant following the author. With ChatGPT meant following yourself, and with Anya Lyon, with my method was where did you get it from? Which is connecting the dots, like going outside and exploring the concept from diverse points of view. So I think that's I think story and discourse. I agree with you. If you want to split that, you can. If that works for you, I think.
But
But
the issue, sorry, but you know, Wang has talked about there's a difference between meaning makings and discourse. There is only meaning, Wang. There's nothing else. There is absolutely nothing else. In the end, it's the meaning that you make from what you are surrounded with. If you have an issue with cultural and other discourses, that contributes to the meaning making. It is not separate from the meaning making. It is not, and if you're looking at a hierarchy, meaning making is always at the top and never at the bottom. So that things like whether you want to call it text or discourse or storytelling or culture or whatever, in the end, it's the meaning that you make that counts.
Mm.
So that's the issue. So I mean, critical, whatever everybody has been talking about, critical something for the last 40 years or 30 years, and we're still nowhere near finding a true definition of it. All we have in the end are personal definitions, and or not so much personal definitions, but definitions that we use in our work, kind of functional thing, you know.
so so Andrew, when you read the literature, or when you discuss literature with your students, obviously with the purpose in mind to help them read better, what do you do first? I mean, just don't take too long, because we have other things also to answer. But
Well, I'm not very scientific. I don't have an approach or a method other than, and Wang knows that probably better than most people. I have questions that I get my students to ask themselves, right, and to ask of the text. The first question is, so what? So who cares? If I read something, maybe I don't read it because I'm desperate to learn something new, because in general I won't.
and that's the point you were making before. And I think that's I mean, there will be lots of people watching this podcast, and whether you find it relevant or not, I just will share my comments about literature and Andrews. I think that there's in every paper, or in many papers, there will be something that you can hang on to and maybe address. But sometimes it's not big enough. It's not a punch to take you to another world. It's literally maybe a bit of a stretch sometimes, but someone like me is looking for punches so that I can move, shift
Yeah.
somehow. See,
So let me, yeah.
yeah.
Just let me go on for a bit. So the first question is, so what? And connected with that question is, how does this change anything if we apply it? How does this change anything? Are you going to, is this going to change your life? Is this going to change your teaching? Is this going to change your thinking? How does it matter? Then there's another question that I ask, which is, who cares? Who cares? Will anyone ever apply this, whatever the this is, considering the inertia of the field and the general stagnation of the field. So let's take my example. My student, Tsai, and I made some discoveries about how the brain works. And Zhang Xiaobing. We've discovered, for example, that if you manipulate an audio signal that students listen to, it looks like their performance will improve automatically with no extra work on their part by roughly 7%. At the moment, it's only 7%, very small, but it's significant, and it was done with a double-blind rating system and so on. Potentially, this is really a big deal, a really, really big deal. Will it have any impact on anybody? The answer is no.
I think
No,
even if you went, even if you went with your findings, say to a conference of neuroscientists, they would be very happy. They would pick up on that, but education will never pick up on that. Education is so self-entrenched in their own readings. They read each other. Like someone said on Facebook the other day, why do we publish? Isn't it just to share? And I said it's about reproducibility, it's about application and people don't understand. They think this is just like venting out practically. That's what the comment was. You just publish to vent out and get published or promoted. And I'm thinking, well, that's what it tends to look like. That's why it's a waste of time. And I'm really sorry, I'm not arrogant, but really I find, so say some sociologist 40 years ago said something, so I'm reading someone else and they repeat the same thing with barely any in-depth implications for anything. And I'm thinking, like, I've read it before in this form or another form, but I've read it before. Your take is interesting, but it's not changing my world.
And yeah, and that's part of the issue. It doesn't change your world. And if you look at as I said, there's a headlong rush of people publishing. So let's say somebody does a study on prepositions, my favorite topic. Somebody does a study on prepositions and discovers that by magic, if you use a particular approach to teaching prepositions, you will improve something or other. If you use a particular approach on studying verb tenses, the verb tenses will improve. There's a study on apologizing that somebody in pragmatics did, and there's a study on autonomy. And by the way, when speaking of autonomy, Anya was talking about sociologists repeating themselves. The autonomy field is magnificent at saying the same thing over and over again. Hollick said it in the late 70s, and everybody else has made careers out of reformulating his sentence. And so it's kind of amazing how we just keep going around in circles. So what I'm really saying is, how you read is important. What you expect to get out of the text is important. How demanding you are. And people keep saying, oh, I have to read more. And this is the interesting thing. My students always tell me how they need to read more. And having read more, is that going to have any impact on anything? And the answer is generally no. Unless you direct them in ways in which they start asking different questions, not about details, but about big questions. Wang's doing some big study. I mean, intellectually big. And I think those things are really, really central to the development of the profession. But we are being pushed into producing very small things, as I said, study on prepositions, study on this and that. And we actually don't get very far, especially as sometimes findings are contradictory, and especially as it is difficult to integrate the different findings that we have made after doing particular studies. So where does the study So things like, so what? How does this change anything? Will anyone ever apply this in any significant way? Given that at the same time, there is this juggernaut of TESOL, which is driven not only by the dogma of the field, but also by practical things like textbook publishers, and also textbook publishers, and also all the training centers around the world. Do your 150 hours of teaching English and you'll have a career in Thailand, you'll have a career in Cambodia, you'll have a career in Indonesia and Vietnam, and you make a lot of money, or maybe not a lot of money, but you'll be comfortable and so on. And even in Thailand, even in Thailand in the present day, just recently, last couple of years, there was, despite the anti-native speaker discourse in the language field, there is, maybe still is, I'm not sure, an initiative to hire 10,000 native speakers of English to help Thailand get out of the hole that it is in. And by the way, Cambodia, Indonesia, Vietnam, we're all in the same boat. The field has not moved for 12 years in terms of at least the EF proficiency index, which is highly correlated with IELTS and TOEFL.
So Australia just had a report out. Now, I haven't read the report because this month has been a hell for me. But one of my doctoral students has, and two of them, and the answer was Australian children can't read. Now, obviously, the field, I looked at the report a little bit, and if you follow me on Facebook, you will find one post I committed to it. And I just, as I said to you, I'm so into scanning now, using my own method for reading. And miraculously, I found this amazing advice in that report about how to read. And you literally could shoot yourself out of the, I don't know, whatever you call it.
In the head.
What is it?
In the head.
Desperation, out of desperation. I commented there saying it's really short, that method that they advise it's really short of the Prussian military training minus the beating, the corporal punishment. I swear to you, the words there, at least they could have chosen better words, like sort of, like when Stalin wanted to kill everyone, he said, I'm liberating you, right? Well, they could have used at least words like this, but they didn't. They just went so straight to the point. So what I'm saying is, as you say, maybe Southeast Asia is not doing very well with English proficiency and their methods, but Australia is blaming now teachers because they came up with this 19th century method of teaching, saying this is how you must do, this is how you must do. So it sounds like the report was blaming teachers. And I'm thinking, where did you dig out those sentences from? Was that from some Prussian military school on how to teach literacy from the 19th century? Where did you get that from? So I think that in that Oceanian area, I'm not touching America, but say, because that's where we're not. We're in this Oceania sort of geography area. We're in trouble when it comes to English. We have a lot of experts. We have a lot of people with ego. And a lot of people are assuring us that they're saving us. Andrew, do you want to finish your point? Because I wanted to come back to Mengli.
Yeah, sure. One of the things I wanted to say is when you're reading stuff, you need to read it with a kind of hierarchy in mind, which means that you have to have, there is a hierarchy. A study of prepositions is not the same thing as a study on rhizomatic systems, just as an example. And I'll throw the word rhizomatic in there in case anybody actually wants to find out what it is, and you can. Later, we can talk about it. But the point is that we need to read within a framework, but until we have the big frameworks in place, the little studies are not going to contribute much to progress.
I think we should include all of those comments that you've made, Andrew, in our grant. We're writing a grant now, and we'll see. You know, just we must actually include all of that there. Mengli, you said something that pretty much relates to what Andrew is saying. Could you share with us how did working with my questions, let's call it my method, how did it make you? What was there that made you realize that I was pushing you to expansion, whereas you weren't pushed like this by the Charles Darwin University support system or even by GPT?
Uh, from how I feel, it's like the question are not designed to ground me in that interpretation, but to use that finding to see how the concept itself can be expanded. I don't know how to put it in word, but
Okay, but we've
I
heard
feel
that.
like
But
I'm forced to think in another paradigm by using the knowledge like from the text. How, in other words, I learn how to just oppose things, even though I don't know what that something new is. But it's not about acceptance of the idea from the text. But
okay, so you sell your
from the
publication very
previous two,
well because you're telling us what you got out of it, but you don't tell us how. So that's a very good sales pitch. Read my book, you'll find out. um, I think that because I know my method, right? So I think to me it's very clear how I am pushing you to read text and in a way that expands your understanding of the text. Lala, do you
yeah,
have any
I
idea how I do it? Yeah,
can I just add one
mainly.
more thing before we move on? Like, I think if you have existing schema about the topic, then you can move on forward. But probably if I'm a little bit new to that, I completely new, I don't have any new knowledge, it somehow still pulls me to like direct the information from the text toward my like experience, my real life experience.
Okay,
But I
so
think like in applying,
but that's something that Andrew teaches, but I still think it's not enough because what you're saying is Andrew likes asking the question, what is it that you know? So all his students hide under the desk. The moment he says, what is it that you know? They all leave the room. They don't want to tell him because they know nothing. All students know nothing the moment you ask them. I do it differently.
The problem is that because well, Andrew usually assume that everyone has enough knowledge to answer his question, or at least they try to think. The problem is that they do not have prior schemata.
But he,
Actually,
but he
it
wants you
is
to say that.
rather
Yeah,
it
but
is
he wants.
rather the you can well then you force them into the risk of losing their face. the,
Ah, this
the
is
But
problem
they
is
do.
science.
Look,
We're chopping,
Wang,
we're
Wang, Wang,
chopping
Wang.
fruit
You know this
flies.
is simply
They're
you're
losing
one of my
lives. We don't lose
because you're
anything.
one of not only one of my students, you're also one of my friends and colleagues. Um, but the point is that there are two choices. You either say something or you say nothing. Either way, there's a big risk. Because when you ask people, the purpose of asking the question, what do you know, is not to embarrass people. The purpose of asking the question is to try and mobilize people into prioritizing their beliefs and experience and readings. But when you put it that way, it's an aggressive way. I know it's an aggressive way. It's not gentle. I don't know what's
Yeah,
so
but
have
when it
you read
comes from you, it's gentle. When it
so
comes from me,
have you read Guberina? Oh, who? Have you read Bourdieu? What? Have you read Holleck? Who's that? Oh, wait a minute, Holleck. Maybe. Have you read? And so the answer is always
Well,
And
it
I
is
got that
like this.
actually just recently. I
He
just
asked
got that.
he asked the students, "Have you read Shakespeare's?" And they say, "What Shakespeare?"
Yeah. Um, so 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 they feel lost, and the reason to do that is actually to get them to react and feel unlost by drawing. You know, when you go to a job interview in the academic world, people said to me, "So, what journals do you read?" They actually said this to me, and for someone like me who
But it's
reads
not that.
journals only when hmm? Who reads journals only when there's likely to be something interesting in them, it's not a good question. So, but I know enough journal titles to be able to rattle them off and to be able to say things like, "But actually, I do read. I actually do read stuff."
So that is the problem. At least you have something in your mind to make a
Yes,
story, but they don't.
yes, that's right. But that's a problem. So my question is, so what is it that is being taught in master degree programs? Because everybody who's into the doctoral system has gone through a master program or something like it. What is it in the master degree program? So what do you remember? Oh, micro teaching. Uh, uh, well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yeah, Chomsky, and Krashen, Chomsky and Krashen. Yes, I remember Chomsky and Krashen. Okay, so what do you remember about Chomsky and Krashen? Oh, well, you know, Chomsky is a famous linguist, and Krashen, and also Jeremy Harmer. Jeremy Harmer, very popular man because all of his books were photocopied, particularly in Vietnam. And so they remember these names, and occasionally they come up with somebody else. They might say Dernier, Zoltan Dernier. Oh, okay, so what do you know about Zoltan Dernier? Well, I'm not sure. So the point is that people are entering the academic world at high levels without being able to articulate. I'm not saying that they don't know things, but without being able to articulate their backgrounds in any way. And I'm
So
also saying
yeah.
that the MA programs do not prepare them for it because they don't emphasize these things. They just send them out and do prac teaching and basically reproduce the models that
Now
have been part
is
of the dogma of the TESOL field.
that
And there's
is
no
the
change.
I think that is the consequence of the Bloom taxonomy everywhere. They
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
they no yes
I like the
they
taxonomy.
devalue memorization and recognitions. They do not
Ah,
think that these things are important, and they really think like things like application or real practice is what really matters. And it is the same in research. People start to write things without even read or think or thinking.
The
Like we have
problem, the
thinkers
problem
and
with yeah,
doers.
the problem with Bloom's taxonomy is that it places meaning at the top and memory at the bottom. But in order to have memory, you've got to have meaning.
yeah. So Lala, you know me better than Mengli does, and I think that the discussion today helps Mengli to actually um, organize his thoughts better, increasingly better. One of the things, just to cheer up people from Southeast Asia, there is a paper that is coming out between me and my colleagues from Indonesia, from Pekanbaru. And in that paper, I'm a first author, so that's a good thing for me. And I'm the first author because while we use the research conducted in Pekanbaru, a lot of intellectual underpinnings there were created by me. And one of the things that I pointed out as a bit of my contribution to this paper, I illustrated that our colleagues, whether they are uh, uh, what we call in Australia pre-service teachers, which means teachers in training, or whether they are directors of teaching centers, or whether they are teachers already employed, they can't speak about their profession. So you just mentioned that that was the problem at the master level. When they once they finish masters and go to PhD, they can't actually, they don't have a professional language, professional even thinking. But the same happens in Australia with teachers. I have shown examples from publications how people talk about the way they teach. So just to, so it's basically all either memorized, regurgitated, or a best, or at best maybe sometimes a good idea someone said, so I will just tell you what I did, without any framing, without any justification, what makes it worthwhile.
Right.
Someone's system is funny. Can you
Hmm.
guys mute yourselves for a second so we, all right, so Lala, I just wanted to talk to you now. What do you think? I mean, you know my method, and obviously my method has impacted on the findings of Mangley. Which
Yeah.
bit in my method do you believe makes him, or made him, he doesn't know it probably yet, or maybe he's away from his findings now. But which bit in my method do you think made him realize that he has to step out from the paper and look around for more information?
Right. Right. I think the most entertaining part of reading for emotion is to play with our own thinking approach. That's number one. I still remember a moment when we analyzed 250 papers or something, Anya. We had that different patterns of focus, disturbance, dialogue, development, resolution, and moral, right? And then when we came to the analysis of text by Professor Andrew Lyon, for instance, Andrew has this kind of difference in structuring the text. And when we analyze other, let's say, professors' abstract, for instance, they have this and that differences. And then we came to a discussion where we have to develop reasoning. So Andrew did this structuring of the text because of this, and this, and my students has also this reasoning. I think this kind of reasoning part when reading and writing the text using with your method is the most entertaining part. And I do not punish them because they were wrong. I did not prescribe anything other than telling them that any text, any academic test is a story, and then you have to find out the problem and how the author solved the problems, right? And then there is no prescription whatsoever in the learning process. So I think that's the most interesting part. And another interesting part of reading for emotion is that we can actually plug and play with the let's say canonical structure, right? Some students will say that maybe I have to come up with this disturbance first, but maybe I have to come up with the model. So there was actually an interesting discussion. Some students believe they have to do this first. They some others say that, well, maybe we have to think of the model first, but it should be put in the final part of the text. So this kind of collaboration among the students actually is the key in dealing with the method. So in my PhD, I learned a lot from my students. I know that the experiment students, were actually low performing students based on the data that I had from the department. But when we did actually change the whole method of learning, the dynamics of the class were actually changing. So the open dialogue, the open thinking, the connecting the dots faces, and then relating the thinking with other types of story and text, the tinkering process, as I
Okay,
call
so I get it.
that
I
helped
get it.
develop. Thank you.
Okay, so if I can interrupt, so people basically listening to this don't know my method, and I'm not about to discuss it, or this is not a lecture in Anya's teaching, right? So, but what you were saying, that the method or the model that I probably suggested to Mengele to analyze how he reads literature and compare it with other models about how to read literature. What you're saying is that the model that I have is oriented to generate discussion, right? So however it does it, it generates discussion and it doesn't tell people how to write, but it does help people to ask questions about why they design things or why they structure things this way. And what you did, you found with your students that that discussion actually produced results. And I think that the paper that I want to publish now, and I'm struggling responding to my reviewers, I think that's one of the points that I mentioned. And education currently in Australia is very much oriented on straitjacketing people to particular method, to particular first do this, do then do that, and miracle will happen, right? And it takes away that discussion and personal reflection. Why the heck I'm doing what I'm doing? Why you are think why? So if you do have the discussion, why am I doing what am I doing? Then that has a chance, if you're not yet too narrow, that interesting things happen. I want us now in the final minutes of this meeting today. So first of all, I want to thank you all for the contribution for today. That was really interesting. I hope that the people who are actually listening to us and will be, they will get much out of it. This is an abstract from the paper that my students, and including Lala, have read, and that's how I got to have this paper. Now, I chose it because not only my students know it, but also because it's easy to read. I had another one in another slide, but as you can see, it's a little bit in italics. It's difficult, therefore, to read. I just stayed with here. So let us spend 5 minutes on reading it, and see what questions may emerge if I were to push you a little bit into my model. Okay, so the article is this study aims to describe the implementation of systemic functional linguistics of the textual grammar of message to enhance student critical response to the text they created. So, beautiful introduction. This is what will happen, right? I like when people tell me what will happen right from the beginning. Good. For English as foreign language learners, transferring their ideas into writing is a difficult task. Okay, so without reading the rest of it, what we have found is that something that articulation of ideas is difficult, and this person will show how the SFL was helping the students. That's the purpose of the text of the study. So EFL learners, that transferring their ideas into writing is already difficult, and that to give a response for EFL learners, transferring their ideas into writing is already a difficult task, and that to give a response to the text they read or write critically is even more challenging to respond. This study intends to approach the teaching of writing by adopting Halliday's idea of textual meaning and SFL. The students were introduced to samples. He describes what he did. Now, if I have a student or even a scholar who reads this paper, if you apply for a grant and you write this way, if you want to publish this paper and you write this way, from my experience, 100% success. If you want to be professional who actually makes it in this world, this is the template. Now, if you, however, have a different approach to working with texts, you will be asked, why are you using your method? Have you read the other people who are using method B or method A? And why aren't you using them? Why are you using yours? Have you read the 3,000 publications they produced within that method of theirs? Now, my problem is when I respond to reviewers who write to me like this is, why do I have to read them? And they never read anybody else. Notice, nowhere in this text, and I'm emotional here, not because I'm defending my paper, I'm emotional because this is how you destroy the whole discipline. There is nowhere mentioned in this study why the heck he used Halliday. What question is Halliday helping to resolve? Right? Nowhere. But if you are a good student from Melbourne or Sydney University and you follow the old people from there, they will publish it because you're within their paradigm. They know why you do Halliday because they taught you, not because Halliday answers any question about how students make meaning. It's because Halliday and because them, that's all they have. So you are not required even to justify what question Halliday is answering, but it's relevant to teach children or students how to write. Right? There's no justification. All we get is SFL. Students need help. We will dump on them SFL and we will tell you how it helped. Obviously, the findings will be skewed because he will say, oh, look at that. This thing happened. We wanted this to see. And it happened. Look at this. And I'm saying, maybe if you use different way of thinking, maybe more things would happen. You have no comparison. You are assuming. So coming to Mengley, one of the things that I asked him, and he might have either forgotten or hasn't yet integrated everything, is I ask, what's the problem? The problem is EFL learners have a difficulty writing and especially responding to text. Great. So what problem do they have to respond? Okay. So maybe this is good enough problem. I don't know. But what are the perspectives on this problem that would justify particular method? We have no perspective. We just say we just slapped SFL on the students, right? No justification. And that's the problem I have. That this is how you stifle the discipline, by basically presenting a religion without having to justify the religion. At least Christianity, I don't know about other religions or Buddha, I don't know what Buddhism does, but in Christianity we just created a story, we justified it. But anyway, point is, without any justification here, which would enable the reader to look at the concept from SFL, from another perspective, and by looking at these different perspectives, then you put together a method that will help you maybe deal with the problem or help someone else find difficulties with your method. But we don't have any perspectives on the problem of students writing. There's no perspective. We just have a solution. Here's Halliday. That's it. Your comments.
Well,
So
let me jump in before everybody else does. What I find interesting with this paper, with this quote, is that there's actually no theory of meaning in it, in the sense that it says for EFL learners, transferring their ideas into writing is already a difficult task. You don't transfer ideas to anywhere because ideas are not transferable. So you've got to have a theory of meaning before you produce stories like that. You have to have a different story. You don't transfer ideas, you represent an idea according to something or other. I mean, okay, so I think that's one of the weaknesses that immediately struck me. And the second thing is what Anya said before, which is that it just says, I'm going to use SFL. If I did this in my work on perception and said, I'm going to use verbotonalism,
they would murder you. They would murder you on the spot.
The reviewers would immediately murder me and say, what What's verbotonalism? It's such a strange word to begin with. And the point is that every article that I ever write where I talk about verbotonalism makes me waste 1,000 words roughly explaining what verbotonalism is. Because otherwise they won't understand anything that I write. So if I said we're going to use a verbotonal approach to optimize the language signals that people receive. And they're going to look at me and say, oh, what is verbotonalism? What does optimize mean?
And most of all,
Even
Andrew, why do you want to change pronunciation? And thirdly or fourthly, we know that
well,
only
that's a different.
explicit instruction works. So, Andrew, really, if it is not explicit, you should go
But
home.
by the way, we've just finished a study in Vietnam, Wang, where after only 9 sessions, nine, got it? Nine
So less than
sessions.
16.
What?
Less than 16
Less than 16 what?
sessions.
Yes. Well, yes, because we had to fit in with the semester structure, and then we lost time, and then the machinery didn't work, and the administration canceled the class. Anyway, we finished up with 9 sessions, and a minimum of 7 sessions having to be done. There were 3-hour sessions, admittedly, and we compared traditional articulatory pronunciation for teaching voiceless consonants, and we compared that with a verbotonal approach, which had no teaching, and which just had a prosody teaching, with no focus at all on voiceless consonants. 9 sessions, 27 hours of work, no teaching, no theory, no articulation. What do we find? Any guesses? Well, of course there are no guesses, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you this story. But well, the experimental group vastly outperformed the control group. And we did this using an approach called change score analysis, which focuses on the individual rather than on the group. But even if we had used the group, we also would have had very similar results. What do we discover? Everybody's voiceless consonants in the control group, in the experimental group, was immeasurably larger than the other, and that is again using blind raters, and that is again using, as I was going to say, no teachers. It's quite amazing that this has happened, and the teachers of the control group who taught in the articulatory way were very haven't yet been very disappointed, but were very keen to find out what's going on, because about between 25 and 33% of their students went backwards.
Right, but the thing
Whereas
is,
none of the students, same as in the SFL experiments, none of the students in the experimental group went back.
Okay, so but the thing is, if you have an articulatory method, right? Why aren't you? I'm not asking. It's just a rhetorical question. Why aren't you using articulatory method? Because articulatory method comes, I don't know from when, but say 50s, maybe even earlier. So since the 50s, right? So since the 50s, people in neuroscience, in psychology, God knows where, in phonetics, were not sitting and sleeping and repeating each other. They were actually doing interesting things. Like time has moved. So the concept of perception started coming in, right? So you happen to have read it. But the other people, like the SFLers, are running with the flag and saying, well, we're justified, we're using SFL. But if we're looking into the structure of this abstract, notice how often the SFL is mentioned in the first sentence and SFL is mentioned in the second sentence. What would be interesting is actually for the author of this abstract to somehow, rather than covering his bum with the with a method which is legitimized and advocated in Australia, tell us something about it. So if my student wrote something like that, I wouldn't ask him to tell me that they're using holiday. I would like them to talk about the concept of text production or text construction or meaning making, whatever is his problem. I would like to use from holiday a way to explicate the process so that we can see that the problem and the way how holiday solves the problems are isomorphic or matching somehow together. Otherwise, if you say students have this problem and here's the theory of holiday and I'm slapping it onto students, we don't see directly the connection, right? We just are covering the space with the placeholder, which is holiday. And what I'm asking, say, someone like Mengli, when he reads articles, I want him to identify the problem. And then in terms of what concept is this problem actually articulated? What concepts were brought to play? And Mengli goes like, no concepts, Anya. Well, there you go. There you go. And that's how I push Mengli, which in my method, it's called the dialogue, right? What perspectives were put in dialogue in order to tell us more about the problem, right? So later on, when you do your resolution and your moral, you do it in relation to those perspectives, right? Because it is the perspectives that illuminate the problem. Without those perspectives, which I call the dialogue, which is the third stage in my other, it's a stage, it's a category in my model. Without that stage, the issue of students' capacity to write in English is not illuminated. We don't know what that means. I mean, my mother would write that sentence. Students have difficulty expressing themselves in English. My mother can say that. Not a,
And it would
but
be
not
true.
a professor. But not a professor. And then we need perspectives on what is the core concept and how we can actually, what are the perspectives that are important to this concept and which perspectives are in competition with one another. Right? A little bit of meat so that so that someone can see what's happening here. Yes, was it Quang? You were saying something?
He's leaving.
Okay. Oh, do you want to? Does anyone
Can
else
I,
want to comment?
can I just add one thing? I don't see any theory of learning in this document.
There's no student there. They know nothing
There's no
about the
student.
student. They know everything about holiday. They know nothing about the student, and we're hoping to make change in students. How are you gonna do that? You know nothing. It's like I'm talking to my wife. I know nothing about my wife, but I know everything about myself. Everybody would laugh at you. You know, that's not a relationship. So they have a method. They're gonna slap it on the student. The student is not theorized. There's just nothing. They know nothing about the student.
There's no theorization of the student. What there is a statement that it is hoped that by training them to understand textual grammars, and by the way, he's also using the word training as opposed to educating them or as opposed to encouraging them or whatever it is. It seems like a training approach. It is hoped that by training them to understand textual grammar, they'll be able to build their critical thinking skills and evaluate their own. Okay, but how does this miracle happen?
Right.
Like
So that's why someone like me reading an article like this, what do I get out of it when I look at it? Well, I look at the article had a method very nicely showing how students wrote. And so I get out what I get out of it is the confirmation that just it's like what exactly did you expect? That's confirmation of my frustration. That's what I get. But I'm not reading papers like this to get illuminated. I'm not reading these papers like, oh my God, finally someone did something, you know? It's not going to change my world. It is just, it puts me more into desperation. This is 19th century stuff. Halliday wrote his method in 1970s, right? That's so 1970s. So he probably was sitting on frameworks from the 19th century, early 20th thinking. It's not necessarily that modern. And we are in the 21st, and we're running with it and not actually seeing ourselves that it is our duty to illuminate them, theorize them, conceptualize better, use better words, and whatever. Now, this paper was produced by a professor, wasn't produced by a student, right? So it's a professor who actually finished university in Melbourne. So it is completely legitimized by Melbourne. And that's what Melbourne teaches.
And just to go back to what I said before, and to reinforce what you were saying, there is nothing illuminating, and that I think is one of the problems. We need things that we do which surprise us and excite us and make us rethink our common practices. I mean, if Ramachandran said to me, or wrote an article which said that doing an experiment with mirror cells would help develop literacy or foreign language proficiency or something like that, I would be falling over myself to try and find out how do mirror cells work. And
Actually, I'm thinking about it. I mean, I thought about the mirror cells and the experiment with the mirror and with the gestuality and pronunciation, the tensions and all kinds of things. I've been actually thinking over the summer how that actually could be also utilized.
And there is a mirroring effect which happens between people as they speak to each other or as they learn from each other or something. I know nothing about mirror cells, but I'm fascinated that there is a kind of reproduction in the interlocutors of, let's say, a small part of the other person's brain.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure about how that works, because also in my own framework, everything is ultimately semiotic, even within one's own consciousness.
Well, so you not necessarily know
the
what
the connection between
it doesn't stop anything, because your interpretation, your emotional imitation still is yours. So he doesn't say it's one-to-one, but there is. So
right.
I'm sure that most people from education, at least, who are listening to this conversation have no idea what we're talking about, because, Halliday doesn't talk about mirror cells, And anyway, it is just a neuroscience jargon. Like, we've got ways to humiliate other people, and we've got ways to enhance or elevate ourselves. Oh, we just said Halliday. That will do. Look at me. I am the replica of Halliday. If you are a replica of Halliday, we will publish you with no comments. If you publish something against Halliday, in relation to pedagogy, then we're gonna make you read 3,000 books, and you have to reply to every those titles. We're not gonna let you pass to our journal. We're here like Cerberus, gonna guard the journal. It is Hallidayan journal.
Right, and it doesn't have to be Hallidayan. I mean, I think this applies to all mainstream journals, that particularly those that are recognized as Q1, Q2, and so on. I think that
So I don't have a
mix.
problem. I will respond, and I will respond very well. But when I'm
It
saying,
doesn't matter.
what I'm saying is,
I don't think it matters.
He doesn't have to.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that outliers find it almost impossible to become visible.
Yeah, because you have to read every other person in the mainstream, and you have to waste your time reading replica and replica and replica of the same stuff and reproduce responses forever. If you want to spend time on doing something innovative, there are ways of choking you.
And that it takes a lifetime to bring something out of invisibility into visibility. And so if you look at, say, the rhizomatic stuff that I've been doing, at least published since 2004, and Anya has also been involved in these things and so on. At least since 2004, it's only 20 years later, like 2023, 2024, that there's a little bit of movement on it. Because
And what surprises me in Australia, because I obviously have colleagues around the country, right? And I hear it. So one of my Indonesian students now passed, and he had, obviously I'm a supervisor, so I knew who his examiners were. And one examiner was from Melbourne, and I mean, this guy wrote things like, I've never met him, by the way. He wrote things like, he was excited reading chapter 2 of my student, right? Excited.
yeah.
It must be published now. Now. So he gets excited. I hear from other people in Australia that they actually think there has to be put, not an end so much, but, that there has to be made space for other ways of thinking and doing things. And they actually don't like SFL. There's been a criticism of SFL in Australia, in Britain, for at least 20 years. That is not even integrated in those articles. Nobody comments on that. But there is. The problem is that the gate, the firewall is so strong that there is no, that nothing is coming through. It almost seems like this seems like the method to use, because nothing is coming through, despite of an awareness of problems inherent to the method. But today we're talking about reading, and we're talking about reading professional literature. And my problem here is not necessarily just my own position, but how people who are within the mainstream paradigm can write using placeholders, like we're using Halliday's idea. Identify the idea. Make a relationship between this idea and the problem you want to solve. Make the relationship between this idea and other ideas. Demonstrate the relevance of which idea you thought would be most meaningful or relevant to the problem you want to solve, or how linking different ideas will be relevant to the problem you want to solve, and then explain to me your method. Whereas here, just with some students and we just introduce them to text. What does it mean to introduce students to text? What does that mean to introduce students to text? I have no idea. I know exactly what he's saying because I know the method. But the point is, if you write an article, it's not the same as being in the classroom, or right, you actually have conceptual problems to solve. So don't write placeholders. Identify the concepts in which you frame your problem, and identify other concepts, and show why the one you use is important, or why the combination of the concepts is important. Develop the methodology from it. Do not tell me that you will introduce students to text. Make the relationship between methodology and how you frame the concept, and then report the findings and the significance of your study in relation to in relation to the framework within which you have constructed the problem. Framework, which means concepts, not just, we just slapped on them SFL. That's not a framework. That's just descriptive system of language. Means nothing to pedagogy, completely nothing. That's why these people invented a specific methodology with no actually theorizing. And it's showing, because this person, who is although high profile author, he can't do the conceptualization because they've never done any. They've never made any. And that's what shows through this abstract. And reading the paper, yes, you can read the paper, but it doesn't go beyond what is in the abstract. And that's how reading professional literature looks like. Someone who is novice, someone who doesn't know any process or has no mentoring in the process for critical reading says, oh, it worked because students put two adverbs together in the text. And I'm thinking, so what? I mean, I can train my dog to count. They trained monkeys to count, So, yeah, but monkey still is not going to write Shakespeare, right? So what? That they produce adverbs in the right place, or maybe some connectors or something. what's the problem that students had to solve? The problem that they had to solve needs to be identified straight away in the paper and conceptually, and then conceptually framed, so that I can relate the findings to that conceptual framework in which the problem was defined. I'm not happy that they produce adverbs, or I'm not happy that they produce connectors in the text. Like, what does it say? What is it telling me? And that's why reading these things is difficult. It's difficult because it's boring. And it's difficult for students because students intuitively understand that there is nothing in that abstract and following also the paper to teach them. There's nothing to learn. They learned nothing about the brain. They learned nothing about the text. They learned nothing about the student. They learned nothing about the process of putting ideas on paper. Nothing. And then they say it's difficult to read. And you think it's difficult because they don't speak English. No, it's difficult because it's nothing in this paper. And then my students read, I have Amy Norman reading Affective Neuroscience by Jack Panksepp, a book like this. And her ears are shaking. She says, he's such a good writer. He's writing neuroscience on play. And she reads it. She has no training in professional text. She loves it. She says it's such an easy text. It's easy because the guy explains everything. Everything. It's exciting. You're learning. My other students, I force them to read Ian McGilchrist. And they go, oh my God, he's such an easy author. Yep.
No, he's not easy at all.
But he explains.
He's not easy at all. He's not easy at all. Yeah,
but
he explains.
Every concept is explained. It's connected.
But he explains in the way that an elegant British gentleman explains. You have to be able to tune into that level of language.
You've got 1,500 pages to do that.
And yes, but it's actually quite difficult. Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm running out of space.
Okay, so we will finish for today. I hope that we had a good podcast. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and Quang as well.
Mengli, it was great to meet you.
Yes, Mengli, we hope to see you here more often, especially when you return to Cambodia. These podcasts will keep you going. We will be testing how you are, keeping you alive intellectually. Hopefully, you will actually enjoy being with us. We look forward to your career developing and your wonderful contributions and intellect. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, everyone who will re-watch it or has watched.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.